We will see this rain just spreading more widely across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but temperatures widely holding up in the mid to high teens in parts of eastern England, may not drop below 20 Celsius, so a very warm start to Tuesday. Will be a very different day through western Scotland, through the central belt, thick cloud, a little bit of rain here and there, and some of that rain for Northern Ireland too. For most of England and Wales, well, maybe a bit more cloud than today, thickening up at times, but generally lots of hot, hazy sunshine. Temperatures maybe a degree or so lower, but still into the low 30s across the southeast, widely into the mid-20s. Further north, we will see temperatures a little lower during Tuesday. Through Tuesday evening, again, a bit more cloud, perhaps across parts of the south, maybe the odd spot of rain, a few showers in the far northwest, but for most it stays fine and dry. But this line of cloud across parts of the south early on Wednesday, that is a weather front, and that's introducing slightly cooler air for Wednesday. Again, most places dry with plenty of sunshine, but temperatures won't be as high. We're still looking at very warm conditions, mid to high 20s across the south, low 20s further north. That's more typical for the time of year, but not quite as high, certainly in the south, as these current couple of days. That cold front is the reason why it pushes away the heat, but as high pressure builds back in, we could see the heat building once more during this weekend, particularly so across the south.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it, Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hi there, welcome to Brazier. Some fast-paced news from 4 until 6. In the next hour, do roll up. The runners and riders are off with 11 Tory MPs throwing their hats, metaphorically, into the ring for the top job. Conservative Party leader and Prime Minister looking at their chances with you throughout the course of the next hour or so. But how they meet their fate lies in the hands of the influential Backbench 1922 committee. It's meeting right now to elect a new executive. While we're on air, we should have the timetable for the leadership election. We're expecting a few leaks. This is politics after all. And as the heatwave kicks in with a vengeance, we'll ask, how hot is too hot? Stay tuned. and we'll try to formulate an answer for you. With me for the next 2 hours, the political commentator Emma Webb here in the studio. But first, we have the latest news headlines with Polly.
Good afternoon, I'm Polly Middlehurst in the GB newsroom. And the latest top stories this hour. Boris Johnson says he's determined to use his final few weeks to deliver the prime ministerial mandate he was elected on. Speaking in his first public appearance since resigning as Tory leader, he refused to endorse any of the 11 candidates running to replace him. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is the latest senior cabinet minister to add her name to the list, with the Prime Minister saying throwing his weight behind a particular candidate could damage their chances.
My job is really just to oversee the process for the next few weeks, and I'm sure that the outcome will be good. And we just need to get on. And as I said, I think before to you, the more we focus on the people, on the people who elect us, on their jobs, their hopes, what they can get out of investment in science and technology. The more we talk about the future that we're trying to build, the less we talk about politics at Westminster, the generally happier we will all be.
Well, as you've seen within the last hour on GB News, the former Health Secretary Sajid Javid has been making his speech, launching his campaign to become the next leader of the Conservative Party. He said the country deserved a leader that unites people.
While families are limiting their weekly shop, politicians are getting caught up in arguments over who knew the latest sleaze allegations and when. And this isn't just bad for the country. It's catastrophic for all the Conservatives. Because when we lose our integrity, we lose the trust of the British people.
Well, a timetable for the Tory leadership contest is expected to be drawn up this week once the new executive has been voted into the 1922 committee. The influential group of Conservative backbenchers will then finalise the rules of the leadership contest itself. That could include changes to limit the number of candidates who can run. They're also looking to change the rules governing a no-confidence vote, something the Labour Party is also pushing for in order to attempt to immediately remove Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer has accused the candidates running to lead the Conservative Party of desperately trying to launder its integrity. In a speech delivered in Newcastle, the Labour leader said Britain was dealing with a crumbling economy and deserves better. He also hit out at what he calls the hypocrisy of those who served in the Prime Minister's government, saying they supported tax hikes despite being opposed to them all along.
Well, what we've seen this weekend from all the Tory candidates who want to be leader of their party is £200 billion of unfunded spending commitments. And my challenge to them is say precisely where that money is coming from. Is it going to be cut? If so, what's going to be cut? Because we need to know. Is it going to be borrowing? If so, where are you borrowing from? How much are you borrowing? Or is it just the magic money tree?
Well, in news away from politics, a 15-year-old boy has been sentenced to life for the murder of schoolgirl Ava White. The teenager must serve a minimum of 13 years for the fatal stabbing of the 12-year-old in Liverpool last November. The defendant, who hasn't been named, claimed he accidentally stabbed Ava in self-defence, but a jury convicted him of murder following a 2-week trial. Ava's mother, Leanne White, says the murder has affected so many people.
It has a deep impact on her friends. Her friends witnessed that night things that no child should ever witness. Even the adults that come to Ava's aid on that night, it had a deep impact on them as well.
Ex-Formula One boss Bernie Ecclestone is to be charged with fraud by false representation. HMRC investigators say they believe they found more than £400 million worth of assets overseas that he failed to declare. The case will have its first hearing on the 22nd of August. The Conservative MP Jamie Wallace has been found guilty of 3 traffic offences at Cardiff Magistrates Court. A member of Parliament for Bridgend was disqualified for driving for 6 months and fined £2,500 after failing to stop and failing to report a road traffic collision. He was also found guilty of leaving a vehicle in a dangerous position after a crash. Heathrow Airport has ordered airlines to cancel more than 60 flights scheduled for today because it can't handle the expected number of passengers. A spokesperson for the airport says it's expecting Terminals 3 and 5 to be busier than usual, and they're warning holidaymakers they could cancel more flights this summer. Tens of thousands of people have already been affected by flight delays and cancellations over the last few months. You're up to date. That's all from me for now. We'll bring you more news as it happens here on GB News. For the moment, it's back to Brazier.
4:07. Welcome. So far, 11 MPs, Conservative MPs, have entered the race to become Prime Minister in time. Among their number, let's just trot through some of the names. You're familiar with them already. Rishi Sunak, Kemi Badenoch, Nadeem Zahawi, Sajid Javid. There's Jeremy Hunt, Tom Tugendhat, and earlier today, Liz Truss, Penny Mordaunt as well. What kind of Conservative party will emerge? Nadeem Zahawi emerging from number 10. What kind of party will emerge when this process is eventually finished? Will it be managerial or ideological? Government by cabinet? Sajid Javid just made that point in a speech you saw in the last hour. He says back to cabinet government. Or something a bit more presidential, a bit more like the Blair era, sofa government, all that stuff. Will it be an election-winning machine or a laboratory for culture war ideas? There's a lot to play for. Let's turn to Rod Liddle, Associate Editor of The Spectator. Rod Liddle, welcome to you. I say a lot to play for. What say you?
I think there certainly is, and I think it's extremely important for the Conservative Party that they think very, very long and hard before simply installing someone like Rishi Sunak or indeed Tom Tugendhat, clever though he is, or Nadeem Zahawi into a position of power, because I'm telling you, it will not play well up here in the red wall seats, which the Conservatives are in great danger of losing. I think what the Tories have to kind of come to terms with is the fact that the culture stuff, the culture war, the arguments over all those identitarian political things is the main subject. You know, if you look for differences between the various people standing for the Conservative Party, for the leadership, there's no real clear blue water on economics. Some say they will give you tax cuts before the economy's grown, though I don't know how they'll do that. Others will say they'll have to wait for the economy to grow and then give you tax cuts. There's essentially no clear blue water on any of these issues. There's no real clear blue water on any economic policy. Where there is clear blue water is on the culture stuff. And that's why I am hoping for the good of the country that Kemi Badenoch or Suella Braverman, or maybe if she stands Priti Patel, will get the nomination.
You know, that great big portmanteau word of words, culture war. You include Brexit in that, don't you? That's not a sort of separate political subject. That is absolutely front and centre of the culture wars.
It's front and central of the country of the culture wars up here, though I think it's obviously receded a little in the public imagination to what the position was, 3 or 4 years ago. No, I'm talking about particularly the way in which we teach our kids about sex education in schools, the obsession with gender politics and transgender politics, the obsession with race. The obsession with doing down our country on decolonizing and so on. These are the kinds of things which it would be great for a Conservative Party to come out in opposition to in a way which it hasn't done throughout Boris Johnson's tenure. And there we have, a brilliant candidate like Kemi Badenoch who actually could do that. And I think it would be almost impossible for the Labour Party to beat a Conservative Party led by Kemi. A young, very clever, very sharp, very confident young woman who comes from an ethnic background and who has fought her way up to becoming a potential leader of the Conservative Party. That's something the Labour Party's never been able to do anything like that. The Labour Party looks at black and Asian people, and indeed women, as being kind of needy clients, but never lets them actually run the whole affair. The Conservative Party could do a lot worse and put Kemi into the position of leader.
I think it was Jolyon Morn, the QC, wasn't it, who over the weekend in a tweet which he, I think, fairly shrewdly deleted, said something like, he's a lawyer, I need to be very careful about the words I choose, but something like, the Conservative Party is not ready to have an Asian Prime Minister.
But I think he actually asked if the Conservative Party was ready to have someone of Rishi Sunak's colour as Prime Minister. But he's a loathsome man, and he's a man who clubbed a fox to death. I don't have any time for these people. The thing with the Conservative Party, to its credit, because there are a lot of things not to the Conservative Party's credit, but to the Conservative Party's credit, they have actually ensured that people from ethnic minorities and diverse backgrounds are represented at the highest levels of authority. It's something which the Labour Party simply cannot do.
Rod Liddle, we appreciate your time. Nice talking to you. Thanks very much. Who then is favourite to win? Well, current odds suggest it's Rishi Sunak, though Rod Liddle not very keen, as you just heard. Who are the rank outsiders? Who's going to drop out? The dark horse? Is there a dark horse? Let's turn to Matthew Shattuck, who's the head of political markets at Smarkets. Matthew, welcome to you. Take us through the runners and riders in a way perhaps we've not necessarily come to understand, because there is a sense in which these sands are shifting and quickly.
Hi, Colin. Yeah, that's right. This is a huge betting market, maybe one of the biggest UK political betting markets of all time. It's shaping up to be. And as you say, Sunak's favourite, but not overwhelming favourite by any chance. He's got around a 35% chance of winning, according to the latest odds at Smarkets. And just behind him, Penny Mordaunt and Liz Truss are the next most likely candidates. And just listening to Rod Liddle, he mentioned, I think, he wanted Patel, Badenoch or Braverman to win. Well, the combined chances of those three right now, the odds at Smarkets say is about a 10% chance he'll get one of those three winning.
How volatile, Matthew? I mean, you know, he was really championing the cause of Kemi Badenoch there. A week ago, nobody had really heard of her outside of political circles. So with a little bit of exposure, things can move quickly.
Yeah, I mean, she was about a 200 to 1 shot a week or so ago. And now she's, well, into about 20 to 1, so about a 5% chance. Still unlikely, but she's moving up into around fourth or fifth place in the betting right now. So there may be a few people sitting on some very nice betting positions with her.
Matthew, we enjoy getting people like you on the telly and the radio to talk about these odds. Is it abstract, or are people actually placing substantial bets, actual money?
Oh, yeah, there'll be tens of millions of pounds speculated on the result of this election across the UK before we get to a winner. So this is a huge, huge market with many, many people getting involved. And I think one of the good things about political betting is these are people with sort of skin in the game. These are people not just with opinions, but people prepared to back them with money, which is one of the reasons why we think the odds are sometimes the best guide to what's going to happen in events like this.
Head of political markets at Smarkets. Matthew, nice to talk to you. I'm sure we'll talk to you again over the next few weeks. Thanks a lot. Emma Webb is my guest in the studio today. Emma, have you had a bet?
If I were to bet, I would put my money on Kemi Badenoch, even though the chances are low, not necessarily because I think it's a sure shot that she would win. But I think that this is a really seriously important issue for the Conservative Party. As Rod Liddle alluded to there, that with the danger that the Conservatives face in those marginal red wall seats, they need someone like Kemi Badenoch to be at the helm. And while things to do with the economy and inflation are obviously very important, Kemi Badenoch's approach, unlike some of the others, is actually a very almost Thatcherite low-tax vision. She has the charisma to lead the party, and whilst it may be the case that perhaps she'll end up with a senior ministerial role, or perhaps further down the line will have a really good shot at the leadership position, I think the Conservative Party needs someone like Kemi Badenoch. Well, not someone like Kemi Badenoch, it needs Kemi Badenoch. And I don't think that any of the other contenders, particularly Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt, I think would be bad for the future of the party.
Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, has come in to talk ostensibly about the 1922 committee. It's meeting now. We'll talk about that. But just, Darren, just on the Rod Liddell's point, that if the Tories want to retain the red wall, they've got to fight it on the culture wars. I mean, that throws out a lot of existing political logic, doesn't it? Was it Bill Clinton or George Bush
the
Senior
economy
who said...
stupid.
Yeah, it's the economy stupid.
I mean, the big thing is, I mean, it does boil down to, I think, the economy stupid in many ways. And the reason I say that is because the next couple of years, frankly, are going to be pretty tough for a lot of people out there. Frankly, for almost all of us, really, in the end. I mean, this country is going to see very high inflation for a prolonged period of time. Interest rates are trying to get under control. I mean, when it comes down to it, I always argue politics is about bread and butter, really. It really fundamentally is. I think that the thing about the culture war stuff, to me, is, yes, it does play with a section of society. There's no doubt about that. And particularly when it comes to trans rights, this is a very animated debate amongst two very passionate sides of this debate. But there's a lot of people in the middle who, frankly, aren't necessarily very involved in it. But what they are concerned about is the fact that fuel costs nearly £2 a litre at the top of your car. Really, I think.
Rod Liddell, and it's a key point, says actually it's not just the trans and the critical race theory and the taking the knee. It's Brexit. It's Brexit stupid. It's that sense that people have, and we and you get the emails from people who feel betrayed right now. They're worried that if Boris goes, Brexit goes. So it's not just the culture war, as we sometimes portray it on this news channel. It's the culture war which takes in Brexit too, because that's a big part of people's identity.
Which is a really fascinating kind of part of the discussion about the Conservative Party's having right now, which is, does it have to be a Brexiteer who remains leader of the Conservative Party? I mean, a good example of this is that there is a sense that some people may have moved beyond that. Esther McVeigh, for example, a presenter on our channel, is backing Jeremy Hunt, who, has been pretty close to campaign for Remain. And there is this argument that, yes, is there a fear that if there is Liz Truss, for example, will she be trusted because she campaigned for a Remainer and now is a massive convert, almost to the point where she's a hardened Brexiteer beyond other Brexiteers? It's a really difficult one to challenge. I just feel that, when we get close to this election, and it's going to be really interesting, this league is going to take over in September, or late August, early September. We've got party conference season. When that ends, there's an 18-month slope into the election. And it is, to me, I think it's going to be barnacles off the boat. It is going to be this election campaign is already just about taxation. It's going to turn into an economy-led election and a real fight between Labour and the Conservative Party. And I think for voters, and even Red Wall voters, lots of whom are kind of welfare dependent, the economy is going to be at the centre of where they back.
I've got to squeeze in another guest before we get to the break. So briefly, 1922 committee meeting right now. It could have the effect that if some people realise they can't get to the number of MPs supporting them to make the contest, actually things might move tonight. People might say, tonight I'm giving my votes too.
Indeed, yeah, and we're going to see this play out over the next couple of weeks. 1922 committee sorting out two things today. The timetable that will take us up until next Thursday, when we have to have two candidates that the Conservative membership will vote on, when MPs say we've done our jobs. And the second thing is setting the threshold for the number of votes to get into the first round to begin with. Now, at the moment, that is only 8. Some of the MPs running haven't even got 8 publicly backing them. If it's increased to something like 20, yes, clearly some of them will have to drop out. Who they back, and this is why it's so unpredictable, Colin, and it will be for the next 10 days, the people who lose out or drop out of that race, who they decide to back and bring a large proportion of the supporters with, will determine this race. But we have no idea how that's necessary. You can kind of try and second guess. Like, if Jeremy Hunt drops out, would he go to Tom Tugendhat? I don't know. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. But he's got Esther McVeigh. That wouldn't really work. That's why it is so unpredictable.
Giant game of Connect 4, isn't it? Darren, thanks very much. Indeed. Well, I was just saying, Boris Johnson, still Prime Minister, appeared earlier today, spoke in public for the first time since his resignation as party leader. He reiterated his desire to fulfil the mandate he'd been given by 14 million voters.
The job of government has got to be carried on in that period. I've set out for people what the Tory, the parliamentary party have decided. That has the inevitable consequences that it has. But my job, just in the next few days and weeks, is to continue with the programme on which we were elected.
Well, some of Boris's supporters worry when they hear hardline Remainers intone those words. If Boris goes, Brexit goes. Let's turn to the political commentator, Sophie Corker. And Sophie, welcome to you. Are you worried?
I am worried purely because Boris is a proven vote winner. He was elected twice for the London mayoralty, which is something that is seemingly impossible. You could literally put a dog in a red rosette and it'd probably win. He was on the winning side of the Brexit referendum. He won a massive majority in the 2019 election with 19 million people backing him. And he won the leadership contest with almost twice of Jeremy Hunt's vote. He's a proven election winner. Some of these candidates that are running have never been on a winning side of an election. They were fighting for Remain. They were given a safe seat, so they've never had to combat an election from being on, the back foot. They have lost previous leadership elections. You can't govern unless you are elected to govern. And some of these people have never been on a winning side of an election. It's certainly not a tough one that this is going to be.
I recommend a piece written by Brendan O'Neill of Spiked for The Spectator over the weekend, in which he made clear there are literally millions of people, Sophie, I suspect you're one of them, who feel that sense of betrayal. People not necessarily you're engaged in politics, but a lot of these people not particularly engaged in politics, apart from that one big thing.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand for many of these people in this country, they didn't vote for the Conservative Party. They voted for Boris Johnson. And that's something that Red Wall MPs especially need to start admitting to themselves, because that is the reality. And a lot of people are really disappointed and disillusioned with democracy because we have enabled to effectively oust the Prime Minister with an 80-seat majority. We've managed to get rid of him. So at that point, what is the point of electing a new leader? Because democracy in this country is effectively dead, because someone with that size of a majority, that size of a mandate, has been taken down, in my view, by the media. That is not a good thing at all.
Sophie Corcoran, we have to leave it there. Appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Emma Webb alongside me. Just to pick up briefly on that theme, that there's a lot of people feeling let down.
Well, I think that there's another aspect to this that isn't getting as much discussion, which, of course, many people did vote for Boris. They trusted the Conservatives for the first time in their lives because of Boris. But ultimately what has happened is, if you remember that after Boris won that election in 2019, he said that he thanked people for lending the Conservative Party their vote. But what he's done in the meantime is he's not taken that historic opportunity, and in many ways he's betrayed the people who voted for him. And that's one of the reasons why he's been ousted. Now, I'm sure that there are lots of other reasons. I'm sure that there are lots of motives involved. But ultimately, the reasons why the Conservatives have been doing so badly in the polls, lost those by-elections quite dramatically, is because the people who originally voted for Boris Johnson feel betrayed and have lost trust in him, and they have lost trust in the Conservative Party. And I think ultimately this is a crisis that isn't even going to be solved by removing Boris Johnson.
He has said, we're not doing that. The Tories are not doing as badly in the polls as midterm often is the case for governments. He would also point to the small matter of a pandemic, wouldn't he? Emma, for now, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, could rural bus services be slashed when government support to fund them is removed later this year? One of those stories that doesn't get the attention it deserves. But if you live in a rural area, boy, you'll notice the difference. That's after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Well, one of those stories that really does matter to people but doesn't necessarily get the attention it absolutely deserves. Bus networks could soon shrink by up to a third across England as government COVID subsidies are removed and commercial operators withdraw from unprofitable routes. During the pandemic, the government provided £2 billion in taxpayers' bailout funding to bus and light rail companies so that they could keep those services running while passenger numbers, of course, dropped, as they did on the trains, for instance, as people stayed at home. From early October this year, that financial lifeline will end, and with the financial lifeline ending, will end some bus routes too. Norman Baker is Director of External Affairs at the Campaign for Better Transport. Norman, I live in a village between two quite substantial towns. There is one bus that runs between those two substantial towns, and if you live in one of those villages along the way, well, you better have a car.
Well, this is the problem because the government is, in my view, rightly trying to encourage people to move to public transport and to reduce carbon emissions. But the reality is that you can only really move if there's a bus service or a train service to go to. And what we've seen over the last really 30 years has been a slow decline in bus numbers in this country, particularly since 2010. And what's happened since 2010 has been that council-supported buses, which are about a fifth of those bus services out there, public subsidy ones, they've declined by about half. Commercial services have by and large kept pace and they've been supported by the bus companies themselves. But since COVID, of course, we've seen a dramatic reduction in passenger numbers. Numbers are down 31% at the moment to pre-COVID levels. Well, you know, commercial bus companies can't sustain that. Now, the government has, to be fair, been supportive of buses in the last couple of years. You mentioned that in your report. But that money from the Treasury runs out in October. And before that, bus companies have to decide what to do because they have to give 8 weeks' notice to the Traffic Commissioner of any withdrawal of services. So unless there's something certain on the horizon by August, then they're going to be taking decisions to cut services, and that will be dramatically serious for many, many people. So we think at the Campaign for Better Transport, what they have to do, the government, is to take an initiative on fares. They have done with rail. They had the Great British Rail Service, which was successful. We think there should be a flat fare across the country, across England and Wales, England anyway, because that's Wales is something different, of £2, which is, I think, Andy Burnham and Manchester looking at, to try and give people confidence to get back on buses. The other thing they have to do, which they haven't done yet, is to tell people that buses are safe. There are still people, particularly pensioners actually, who believe that buses are somehow health risks, as they were back in, perceived to be in March 2020. The government's not corrected that message, and if you look at the number of passengers on buses, you'll find that disproportionately it's people who get free buses who haven't returned.
Emma, surely there's a threat within the opportunity, or an opportunity within the threat here, which is that fuel prices rocketing on the forecourts. Story over the weekend, more people walking to work because they can't afford to run their cars. What a fantastic opportunity for bus operators.
I'm sure that the cycling lobby will be very happy to hear some of this news. I think that this is obviously going to be disastrous for people who are living in rural areas, and as you pointed out, particularly older people, less younger people living in the countryside than ever before. So actually those who are being, quicker to bounce back in terms of their socialising and going back to work are the people who would possibly be using public transport and will not be the people who are using these services. But the problem is that once these things get cut, they're gone. And it's not very easy to get those things back. We saw that with the railways when certain railway lines were gotten rid of. So I think that when we're talking about things like levelling up and infrastructure, we think about these huge, railway projects, but we don't think about the people just trying to get between towns or to do their shopping.
Norman, my stupid question of the day: do any bus services actually make a profit? Or
Yes.
They always right?
No, about 4 or 5 do historically. and it's the 1 out of 5 that were cut by the councils because they had no money. The 4 out of 5 were largely protected by the bus companies themselves. But the trouble is, as I say, since COVID, those passenger numbers have gone down quite significantly, and therefore commercial services are now going to be cut. This is where the problem lies. And the government has been supportive of buses. The Prime Minister has actually been supportive of buses. But the reality is, like it or not, unless we get some more government support past October in some shape or form, there could be a lot of cuts made.
Norman, while we've got you, must just get you to talk about the psychodrama of... Why have I used that word, psychodrama? Everybody calls it a psychodrama. It is fascinating, though, isn't it, the Tory election contest?
Well, 11 candidates, or is it 12? I mean, there's one on the substitute
11
bench.
at the moment.
One on the substitute bench who might join later on. I mean, that will be whittled down. But I think it's very important that the candidates themselves are very honest. They're trying to get themselves on the last 2 in the ballot paper, and they're trying, therefore, to persuade the Tory party membership. They want to be honest about economics. I think it's very easy to say, let's spend more money and let's cut taxes. We all want that, don't we? But it's not necessarily very realistic and responsible to do that. And the danger will be that they'll make some promises to get elected as Prime Minister. And then before you know where they are, they've got themselves a manifesto they can't actually deliver. So I think they've got to be realistic in these matters. And Tory members actually have to ask their candidates, how can you deliver this?
Norman Baker, appreciate you coming in, and we'll talk again about bus services. It's an important subject, isn't it? Thanks very much indeed. Loads of your emails coming in. This is quite a period for the correspondence, for the mailbag electronically on the subject of the Tory election campaign and the contest. Keep those coming in. We'll go through as many of them as we can before we're off air. And also, I'll be sharing my thoughts on whether having served in the military makes a difference. It's an obviously demonstrable way of proving that you are a patriot. And all politicians like to be seen as patriots, don't they? Wrapping themselves metaphorically in the flag. My thoughts coming up before the end of this hour. In the meantime, we're going to take you through to the news bulletin with Polly.
Colin, thank you. The headlines this hour. The former Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, warns the Conservative Party faces electoral oblivion if they don't change. Officially launching his campaign to become the next leader, he called for the Tory party to pull together and avoid poisonous gossip during the contest.
While families are limiting their weekly shop, politicians are getting caught up in arguments over who knew the latest sleaze allegations and when. And this isn't just bad for the country, it's catastrophic for the Conservatives. Because when we lose our integrity, we lose the trust of the British people.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer has accused the Tory leadership candidates of desperately trying to launder its integrity. In a speech in Newcastle, the Labour leader today said Britain is dealing with a crumbling economy and deserves better. He also hit out at what he called the hypocrisy of those who served in the Prime Minister's government, saying they supported tax hikes despite being opposed to them all along.
Well, what we've seen this weekend from all the Tory candidates who want to be leader of their party is £200 billion of unfunded spending commitments. And my challenge to them is say precisely where that money is coming from. Is it going to be cut? If so, what's going to be cut? Because we need to know. Is it going to be borrowing? If so, where are you borrowing from? How much are you borrowing? Or is it just the magic money tree?
And away from politics, a 15-year-old boy has been sentenced to a life sentence for the murder of schoolgirl Ava White. The teenager has to serve a minimum of 13 years for the fatal stabbing of the 12-year-old in Liverpool last November. The defendant, who hasn't been named, claimed he accidentally stabbed Ava in self-defence, but a jury convicted him of murder following a 2-week trial. And the ex-Formula One boss Bernie Ecclestone is to be charged with fraud by false representation. HMRC investigators say they believe they found more than £400 million worth of assets overseas that he failed to declare. The case will have its first hearing on August the 22nd. That's it. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. And Colin Brazier will be back in just a bit.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you. We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
There is other news around. Some of it's happening right now. 10 minutes ago, the train drivers at 4 rail companies voted to strike in a dispute over pay and conditions. 4 more ballots still being counted. This is coming from ASLEF, so it's looking like the train drivers' average salary, I think about £59,000, are going on a strike over pay. Lots of emails were mentioned. We'll try and get through some of them now on the Tory leadership election. Alfie, like Boris or not, the way he was treated by the current contenders was abysmal, ripping his honour apart for their own aims to the sickening bye-bye Boris playground bullies of Labour. Is this the quality of our Parliament now? Stephen says, I think Kemi Badenoch is gaining far more traction than most pundits realise. She would truly be the Labour Party's worst nightmare. Helen says, we are desperate for Kemi or Suella. That is what this country and the Conservatives need. And Joanne says we seem to be selling our morals in return for a mess of short-sightedness and misplaced priorities. Very few have any integrity in politics. And how can Jeremy Hunt have the nerve to put himself forward as a candidate when he wanted to lock us down even longer than necessary? At least Boris was his own man and had some character. How do we judge a politician's patriotism? They all say they love the UK. They're often pictured in front of our flag. But is there any yardstick by which this vague idea of love of country can actually be measured? Any way of testing that national pride is more than just something a candidate feels they have to talk about to win over the masses? How about this? Any politician who has risked their life in defence of their country deserves to be taken more seriously. The obvious contemporary example is this guy, Volodymyr Zelensky. A year ago, he was an international joke, a comedian who stood for high office almost as a send-up. But now, having repeatedly risked his life to rally Ukraine against Russian invaders, he is a global symbol of heroism, democracy and commitment to high office. Time was when military service was the norm here. Even when Margaret Thatcher came to power in 1979, many members of her cabinet had worn khaki. Some of them were highly decorated. Lord Carrington, her foreign secretary, had won the Military Cross for his part in Operation Market Garden. The man she leaned on most in government, Deputy Prime Minister Willie Whitelaw. He'd also won the MC for his part in the Battle for Normandy. Try for a moment to think about what that actually means. Thatcher sat around a cabinet table with several men who had killed for their country, who had sat in tanks expecting any moment to be vaporised by German shells. when a modern career politician says they love their country, having waged battles against corruption or the unions or the establishment, it's really not the same kind of conflict. Of course, veterans turned politicians are now a rare breed. They're more noticeable in politics in the United States, where more than 2 million Americans served after 9/11. But there are also Brits who fought in Afghanistan and Iraq before turning to politics, a cross-party cohort that includes the likes of Dan Jarvis, who became the Labour MP for Barnsley after fighting in Helmand Province as a major in the Parachute Regiment. The Conservatives have several MPs who swore an oath to protect our country, even at the point of a bayonet. The Conservative leadership hopeful Tom Tugendhat was wounded in Iraq during a 10-hour-long firefight with insurgents yesterday. He was asked in an interview to name the naughtiest thing he'd ever done. He joked that he'd once invaded a country. Different values. As we saw with COVID, there's something about serving in the military which creates a can-do mindset. Prime ministers have got into the habit of calling on the army to get things done, whether it's dealing with flooding or the vaccine rollout when everybody else has failed. Veterans are not like most of us. There's an authenticity to their backstory that civilians sometimes lack, iron in the soul, grace under pressure. If, say, Matt Hancock tells you he loves his country, he deserves to be taken less seriously than a former soldier like Ben Wallace, who was mentioned in dispatches in Northern Ireland. The public are rightly cynical when they hear that at least one candidate hoping to become our next Prime Minister held a green card allowing him to live in America until fairly recently. That said, just because someone served in the military doesn't make them a political superhero, but it does mean we can never question how committed they are, really committed are, to our country. Robert Fox is the defence editor of the Evening Standard and joins us now. Robert Fox, welcome to you. Do soldiers make good politicians?
Not necessarily. Some have gone for the top slot. Duke of Wellington, Oliver Cromwell, Napoleon Bonaparte, to name but a few. It's very interesting. There are quite a few veterans who have really seen action in our parliament, and very heroically so. You mentioned Tom, you mentioned Dan Jarvis, both of whom I knew very well, and Johnny Mercer should be remembered too for very, very commendable and brave action. And they, from their experience, I think, do bring something to the party. But I think there is a misunderstanding of the military. They're seen almost in Rudyard Kipling, Tommy Atkins terms. The number of times that poem, Tommy this and Tommy that, comes up in our weekly newspapers is really rather tiresome. And I think there was an illustration of this. Katie Balls, great commentator and columnist of the New Statesman, wrote an article about this, about the military element in Parliament. She's great on Parliament. She's absolutely lousy on the military, particularly the modern contemporary military. Very little understanding.
To give her a dues, I think it's the Spectator, not the New Statesman, unless she's crossed the floor. Unless she's crossed the floor. Robert, you mentioned the aptitudes that kind of military service allows a former serviceman or woman to bring to politics. What are those things? Are they better at dealing with pressure because they've seen what real pressure sounds like and feels like?
Adaptability, risk-taking. The really good ones have the humility to listen to what those under their command are saying. And this is particularly illustrative of the situation we now see in Ukraine. Where the Russians have been doing so terribly badly is because they have poor confidence in their NCOs. That means the sergeants, the sergeant majors, the corporals, on which any army runs. Now, people like Dan and Johnny Mercer and Tom Tugendhat would have lived with their sergeant majors, and they would not only been their executive officers, making sure everybody did things, but they would also be their consigliere as well, and that's terribly good. But the problem really begins to occur, I think, when you think that everything can be done by a military approach, when it's susceptible to what we might call very loosely a military solution. And actually, when the military pile in and come sorting things out, and they do things very well, as you rightly said, Kate Bingham observed this over the vaccine rollout, the civil servants go mad. They really don't like being told what their business is. But when you ask the military and to do their business, they have, if you rightly say, been very, very good. And in COVID, I think in the UK, they have been very undervalued.
And it's funny, actually, because if you think about it, I know we don't think of soldiers, sailors and airmen as civil servants, but that's what they are. They're civil servants with weapons, aren't they, in a sense? Just on my slightly cheeky dig at Rishi Sunak, I mean, I think, for all his many, many competencies, there is that doubt, isn't there, about whether somebody who is so gifted and can so effortlessly potentially glide around that sort of global elite, and who was reluctant, well, we don't know if he was reluctant, but he didn't give up his green card, allowing him to go and live in America until, into his chancellorship. I think I'm right in saying that. And that does at a time when people like Keir Starmer want to be pictured next to a Union flag. Any Conservative minister you can mention wants to be pictured next to a Union flag. The people who've actually worn it on their shoulder, just here, above the arm they hold a rifle with, we take more seriously, don't we?
Yes, we do. But we need to take them actually more seriously, because I fear that one of the things that is occurring, particularly amongst Rishi Sunak's team at the Treasury, or former team, is that something like Ukraine, for instance, Ukraine isn't in fiscal terms, in Treasury terms, in the balance of payments, in what we've got to do in the next budget. Defence, by and large, by that element, is seen as a bolt-on nuisance, an unnecessary thing that we should really pare down. There's a lot of pressure within Whitehall now to cut the numbers again, to cut the figures. Boris Johnson at least knew and read from what Ben Wallace had explained so well. And Ben is an extraordinary combination of the very heavy infantry and very brave heavy infantry officer, a brilliantly adroit politician, and has really got this sorted. But I think the rest of the country, and quite a lot of Parliament, including the Labour Party, the Labour opposition, has a lot of catch-up to do.
Robert Fox, really good to talk to you as ever. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Emma Webb alongside me to give this one some thought. In fact, that cohort that I mentioned there, who served in Afghanistan and Iraq, they're getting on now. That's 15, 20 years ago.
I think one of the things that we have seen discussed a little bit over the past couple of weeks is character. The fact that our politicians, as we saw with Andrea Jenkins flipping the bird.
Did you disapprove? Did you disapprove
I
of
did.
that? Yeah.
And I think that a lot of what has been discussed is to do with character. And one aspect of serving in the military is that you cultivate these martial virtues that can be very helpful in political situations. Things like, as you mentioned, fortitude, courage, risk-taking, keeping a calm head when everything is
Not putting your middle finger up because you possess self-discipline.
and having some kind of dignity and sense of service, which I think is something that the British public really appreciate if we just look at how much the Queen and Prince Philip were admired. So I think that there are many virtues that you gain in military service that, regardless of whether it was 15 years or more ago, that's something that stays with you throughout your life and will be very, very difficult for you to shake off because it moulds who you are as a person. But ultimately, I think that there is much more to being a good, effective political leader than that. And whilst things like strategic thinking and that kind of military attitude might come in handy in some contexts, in other contexts it might be missuited to the role of Prime Minister.
Emma, for now, thanks very much indeed. This hour, we've got some breaking news, not necessarily welcome if you're a regular user of our train network. Simon Calder is the travel editor of The Independent. Simon, you've been reflecting in recent weeks on the trouble caused by that national rail strike and the inconvenience that many millions suffered. ASLEF, the drivers' union, have just had a ballot, at least on some of the train companies.
Yes, what we've got, Colin, is 8 train operators. They range from LNER, which runs the flagship East Coast Main Line from London to Yorkshire, Newcastle and Scotland, as well as GWR, which links London Paddington with South Wales at the west of England, TransPennine Express, and then 5 more kind of commuter-focused networks. That includes Chiltern, Southeastern, Northern, the London Overground, really important in the capital, as well as West Midlands Railways, which of course connects the heart of England. And they've voted very strongly in favour of strike action. This comes exactly, as you say, shortly after the first national rail strike for 3 decades, and it was only 3 days of industrial action, but it effectively stretched the disruption for up to a week. And as you say, services vastly reduced. That was members of the RMT union. We've also got the Transport Salaried Staff Association, whose General Secretary has vowed to secure a pay deal for his members, which is matching inflation, in other words, double-digit pay rises. They are also balloting members. So it looks like a long, hot summer of rail disruption. And of course, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, isn't exactly focusing on this because he's much more interested in his campaign to become the next Prime Minister.
Simon Calder making a very good point about who's in charge of the Department of Transport as the looming prospect of rail strikes edges that little bit closer. Simon, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it, as ever, responding to that breaking news story. Let's reflect on some incredibly high temperatures in store right now.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather updates. Hot and sunny to start the week. Temperatures won't be as high through the middle of the week. However, there is the potential for temperatures to rise even further come the weekend. High pressure is dominating at the moment. It's bringing plenty of sunshine today, but this weather front is going to bring a change for some of us in the next 24 hours. Certainly the cloud increasing across northwest Scotland, a bit of rain edging in here through the evening and the breeze picking up. For most, it is a very warm summer's evening, and it's going to be a very warm night, a difficult night for sleeping. We will see this rain just spreading more widely across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but temperatures widely holding up in the mid to high teens in parts of eastern England, may not drop below 20 Celsius, so a very warm start to Tuesday. It will be a very different day through western Scotland, through the central belt, thick cloud, a little bit of rain here and there, and some of that rain for Northern Ireland too. For most of England and Wales, well, maybe a bit more cloud than today, thickening up at times, but generally lots of hot, hazy sunshine. Temperatures may be a degree or so lower, but still into the low 30s across the southeast, widely into the mid-20s. Further north, we will see temperatures a little lower during Tuesday. Through Tuesday evening, again, a bit more cloud, perhaps across parts of the south, maybe the odd spot of rain, a few showers in the far northwest, but for most it stays fine and dry. But this line of cloud across parts of the south early on Wednesday, that is a weather front, and that's introducing slightly cooler air for Wednesday. Again, most places dry with plenty of sunshine, but temperatures won't be as high. We're still looking at very warm conditions, mid to high 20s across the south, low 20s further north. That's more typical for the time of year, but not quite as high, certainly in the south, as these current couple of days. That cold front is the reason why it pushes away the heat, but as high pressure builds back in, we could see the heat building once more during this weekend, particularly so across the south.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Anyone who saw Sajid Javid sweating during a speech an hour ago will know it's hot today, but there's a further blast of hot weather coming this coming weekend. The Met Office said highs of 33 degrees Celsius are expected in some areas on Monday afternoon, with central, southern and eastern England experiencing the rising temperatures during the heat wave. How hot then will it get? Here's John Hammond, director of weathertrending.com. John, welcome to you. Appreciate your time. It's next Sunday that we're gearing up for, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, Colin. And it might actually extend into the early part of the following week as well. Obviously, it's the best part of a week off, and there's some wriggle room. And certainly, there's not total agreement amongst computer models about exactly when the peak of the heat will be and exactly how severe it will be. But you know, I've been in this game forecasting for 30 odd years, and the fact that computer models are occasionally coming up with numbers like 40 degrees plus across the UK, I've never seen before. And it's a measure of just how severe it could get. I'm not saying it's going to get that severe, as I say, it's a long way off still, but there's increasing agreement between those computer models that we are in for a particularly extreme spell, which might last 2 or 3 days. Now, at the moment, 32 degrees is the sorts of numbers we've seen across the southeast. That's hot enough, and the advice, of course, is plenty of fluid and seek the shade, because many people don't like this sort of heat. But we're going to go a notch up, certainly by next weekend. In between, Colin, some respite. For many parts of the UK, once we've got tomorrow out of the way, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday will be mercifully cooler. Although the heat might hang on across southernmost areas, for many it will be refreshingly cooler for a time, and then that heat ramps up again as we head towards next weekend.
John, we just want to check the contents of that glass. Could you just hold it up again to make sure it's not diuretic?
Well, it is water, but it's getting on towards 6 o'clock, so that may change in the goodness of time.
John Hammond, lovely to talk to you. Appreciate your advice. Thanks very much indeed. Let's turn to an NHS GP, Dr. Amos Okunkoya, who can reflect on the health. Hi, Amos. Nice to see you. It always feels like a waste of a GP's time to say, come and talk about hot weather. But when you hear a seasoned weatherman like John Hammond talking about 40 degrees Celsius, golly, I've in this country, we're just not used to it.
We're not. And the health weather warnings is as much for the NHS as it is for people, because the hospital doctors, GPs have to be ready for the increased demand that we're going to get from this really, really hot weather.
And
it's, yeah.
Sorry, Amos, and elderly people first and foremost.
Yeah, it's the vulnerable. So the elderly, the people with chronic conditions. Think back to when we were talking about the vulnerable with COVID. It's similar groups. Babies particularly are at risk because they can't regulate their temperature as well as adults can, and the elderly as well, because a lot of them are vulnerable. A lot of them live by themselves. A lot of them have got limited mobility. So it's one of those things where avoiding hot environment is really important.
Yeah, we always get the emails, Amos, saying, hang on, hot weather's been around for ages. We don't need public health officials to lecture us on staying indoors, closing windows, drawing the curtains, etc. But actually, it does serve some purpose, you would say, I'm guessing.
100%. One of the important things as well is medication. So a lot of the medications aren't built for 40 degrees. So stuff like antibiotics, you usually have to keep them in the fridge, but you have to be particularly careful about how long you leave it out for, because it can make the medication less effective. So it's important to remind people of the basics, basically, of making sure they keep out of the heat during the worst times of the day, shut in the windows, like you mentioned, and the booze as well. Maybe lay off that a little bit.
Sound advice, Dr. Amos Ogunkoya. Nice to talk to you as ever. Thanks very much for your time. Thanks a lot. Just gone 5 o'clock. Coming up this hour, roll up. The runners and riders, they're off. 11 so far. Tory MPs throwing their hats into the ring for the top job. Conservative Party leader and ultimately Prime Minister. We are looking at their chances. Plus, how they meet their fate lies in the hands of the influential backbench 1922 committee. It's meeting right now, electing a new executive. While we're on air, we should have the timetable for the leadership election. It's entirely possible people will look at that timetable, how many votes they need to get through to the first round, and decide it's not worth the candle. And as you just heard, the heatwave kicking in with a vengeance. We'll ask how hot is too hot. Stay tuned and we will aim to give you an answer. With me for the next hour or thereabouts, the commentator on politics and other matters, Emma Webb. But first, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. Well, Boris Johnson says he's determined to use his final few weeks to deliver the prime ministerial mandate he was elected on. Speaking in his first public appearance since resigning as Tory leader, he refused to endorse any of the 11 candidates running to replace him. And the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, is the latest senior cabinet minister to add her name to the list. The Prime Minister says throwing his weight behind a candidate could damage their chances.
My job is really just to oversee the process for the next few weeks, and I'm sure that the outcome will be good. And we just need to get on. And as I said, I think before to you, the more we focus on the people, on the people who elect us, on their jobs, their hopes, what they can get out of investment in science and technology. The more we talk about the future that we're trying to build, the less we talk about politics at Westminster, the generally happier we will all be.
Well, the former Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has warned that the Conservative Party faces electoral oblivion if they don't change. Officially launching his campaign to become the next leader, he called for the Tory party to pull together and avoid poisonous gossip during the contest.
While families are limiting their weekly shop, politicians are getting caught up in arguments over who knew the latest sleaze allegations and when. And this isn't just bad for the country, it's catastrophic for all the Conservatives. Because when we lose our integrity, we lose the trust of the British people.
Well, a timetable for the Tory leadership contest is expected to be drawn up this week once the new executive has been voted into the 1922 committee. That's the influential group of Conservative backbenchers who are then going to finalise the rules of the leadership contest itself. And that could include changes to limit the number of candidates who may run. They're also looking to change the rules governing a no-confidence vote, something the Labour Party is also pushing for in an attempt to remove Boris Johnson immediately as Prime Minister. Well, Sir Keir Starmer's accused the candidates running to lead the Conservative Party of desperately trying to launder its integrity. In a speech delivered in Newcastle, the Labour leader said Britain was dealing with a crumbling economy and deserved better. He also hit out at what he called the hypocrisy of those who served in the Prime Minister's government, saying they supported tax hikes then despite being opposed to them all along.
Well, what we've seen this weekend from all the Tory candidates who want to be leader of their party is £200 billion of unfunded spending commitments. And my challenge to them is say precisely where that money is coming from. Is it going to be cuts? If so, what's going to be cut? Because we need to know. Is it going to be borrowing? If so, where are you borrowing from? How much are you borrowing? Or is it just the magic money tree?
Well, in news away from politics, a 15-year-old boy has been sentenced to life for the murder of the schoolgirl Ava White. The teenager will need to serve at least 13 years for the fatal stabbing of the 12-year-old in Liverpool last November. The defendant, who hasn't been named, claimed he accidentally stabbed Ava in self-defence, but a jury convicted him of murder following a 2-week trial. The ex-Formula One boss Bernie Ecclestone is to be charged with fraud by false representation. HMRC investigators say they believe they found more than £400 million worth of assets overseas that he failed to declare. The case will have its first hearing on August the 22nd. And the Conservative Party says it'll take no further action against the MP Jamie Wallace after he was found guilty of 3 traffic offences in South Wales. The Member of Parliament for Bridgend was qualified from driving for 6 months and fined £2,500 after failing to stop and failing to report a road traffic collision. He was also found guilty of leaving a vehicle in a dangerous position after a crash. Heathrow Airport has ordered airlines to cancel more than 60 flights scheduled for today because it can't handle the expected number of passengers. A spokesperson for the airport says it's expecting Terminals 3 and 5 to be much busier than usual, and they're warning holidaymakers they could cancel more flights this summer. Tens of thousands of people have already been affected by flight delays and cancellations over the last few months. You with GB News, you're up to date. More news as it happens. Now back to Brazier.
Well, so far, 11 MPs have entered the race to become Prime Minister. Amongst their number, and in no particular order, Rishi Sunak, Kemi Badenoch, Nadhim Zahawi, Sajid Javid, Jeremy Hunt, Tom Tugendhat, a supporter of whom we're about to talk to, today Liz Truss and Sajid Javid. We may see changes, by the way, this evening because the 1922 committee is meeting with a timeline, but also a number of MPs supporting a candidature that could mean some of the lesser candidates start considering dropping out and effectively gifting their votes to somebody else. But there are really big questions for the Conservative Party that are posed by this election. What kind of party will emerge when the process is finished? Will it be managerial? Will it be ideological? Will it be government by cabinet or something a bit more like the Blair years, sofa government, presidential style, an election-winning machine or a laboratory for ideas? Let's turn to Anne-Marie Morris, Conservative MP for Newton Abbot. Anne-Marie Morris, welcome to you. You're supporting Tom Tugendhat. Tell us why.
Tom, for me, is a change. I have been in Parliament now 12 years. My generation needs to move over. We need a clean start. Somebody without the baggage, somebody who's bright, intelligent, understands the concept of duty, and who has leadership in spades. He will do the right thing, of that I have no doubt. He has clearly endorsed Conservative values, which for me have sadly not been obvious in much of what's been happening in the last couple of years. He's a team player, and my experience, my personal experience of him, is a very compassionate man who listens, and all of that matters.
Popular amongst people who know him. I dare say he's pretty popular in sections of the media. I just delivered a monologue which very much had him in mind when I was talking about the virtues of martial service, having served in uniform, and how you never have to suffer anybody disputing your sense of patriotism. He's got a great many strengths, but he was a Remainer.
Indeed, as were many others and many of the other candidates. But are we not, do you not think, at a different point now in our history? Brexit was a divider. Brexit's been done. We now need to look not just at, the final peace Northern Ireland Protocol, but we need to look at the Brexit opportunities. And not enough has been said or done about those in the last 2 or 3 years. And yes, he was a Remainer, and he makes an apology for that. But he also makes very clear that on 100 occasions, he actually supported the Brexit concept. It's not as if he was absolutely wedded to Remain. And he sees, as I think so many people who voted Remain see, that the way forward absolutely is the way we voted. It's Brexit. There is a huge opportunity. We've just got to get out there and we've got to deliver it. So I don't have any concerns that he's not going to, do what he says. I'm absolutely convinced he will follow through on Brexit and make sure those opportunities live.
Yeah, Anne-Marie Morris, I've got Emma Webb as my studio guest today. She's shaking her head with some vigour when I talk up Tom Tugendhat. Emma, your point.
I don't have any complaints about Tom Tugendhat as an MP, and I think particularly on issues to do with foreign policy, I'm very sort of supportive of him. one of the concerns that's been raised, and I think this is a valid one, is the lack of ministerial experience. And I think whilst there's obviously the fact that he was in the military, proven patriot, and that with that comes some leadership experience, proven leadership experience, I think many people will be firstly concerned about the lack of ministerial experience. And then there is, in the long term, we need to be thinking about the Conservative Party being able to beat Labour at the next general election. We need to think about what happened in those by-elections. And in order to unite the party, both in the south and in the north, I think you need a figure like Kemi Badenoch or Suella Braverman, but particularly Kemi Badenoch. And I'm not sure that Tom Tugendhat has the ability to unite the party in that way and to win those votes at the ballot box.
OK, Anne-Marie Morris, what do you say to that?
I say that the lack of ministerial time served has never been a barrier to somebody with real leadership skills. You've only got to look at our very own President Zelensky. Who would have thought a comedian would suddenly have turned out to be such a success story? I don't think you have to have trodden the floorboards. I think you have to have, you've got the innate skill or you don't, and I think Tom's got it in spades. As to the North, I mean, you'll be well aware now that Jake Berry has signed up to Tom, and there's no way he'd have done that if he didn't think that Tom could unite us. North, South, Brexit, Remain. Tom is a unifier, and Tom listens, and Tom will get this done. He's somebody who's just bright, young. He will appeal to the younger generation. He'll appeal to all those people so cynical of politicians. This is a guy who you can actually see, real man. And I think he's the guy that we need to put our faith in.
Really nice to talk to you. Appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. Now, Boris Johnson, still Prime Minister, appeared earlier today, spoke in public for the first time since his resignation as Conservative Party leader, again reiterating his desire to fulfil the mandate that he'd been given by 14 million voters.
The job of government has got to be carried on in that period. I've set out for people what the Tory, the parliamentary party have decided. That has the inevitable consequences that it has. But my job, just in the next few days and weeks, is to continue with the programme on which we were elected.
Well, some of Boris Johnson's supporters worry when they hear hardline Remainers say, if Boris goes, Brexit goes. Can that really be possible? Joining me now, the journalist and author and regular contributor here, Ella Whelan. Ella, welcome to you. If Boris goes, Brexit goes, really?
Well, I think it'd be daft to rule it out as a possibility entirely. I think probably there is enough shame in Westminster at the moment to prevent certain people from making ostentatious attacks against Brexit and making kind of very clear-cut, decisions or proposals to step back into a relationship with the European Union. But I really don't think that shame is going to last out. And, we have a sort of even balance, or at least some sort of a balance among the leadership hopefuls in relation to those who supported Leave and Remain. But more importantly, I think, is that even amongst those who voted Leave, there is a general sense among politicians that because the trajectory of the country post 2016 has been, let's put it sort of pretty fairly, a bit of a mess in terms of politicians not being able to get a handle on the positives of Brexit and put it into action, that I think their allegiances towards democracy have been called into question, whether it's in relation to the way they treated civil liberties throughout the pandemic, the way in which levelling up has, to a large degree, failed. Well, that kind of thing means that the idea that Tories are the defenders of democracy, as they did present themselves as being in 2019, I think is starting to wane. So certainly for those of us who care about the main central point of Brexit, which was democracy and sovereignty, I think we have to be watchful.
Imagine, Ella, can't you? You can imagine a situation where economy is tanking. The next Prime Minister says, guys, I'm not a fan of Brussels, but actually there's this carrot being dangled of single market membership. It would lead to an absolute trade bonanza. So we're just going to dip our toe, just a toe back into the orbit of the European Union for the good of the economy.
Yeah, and I think what's happening in relation to the Northern Ireland Protocol was a really good test of that. which is you have a real bump in the road in relation to Brexit, a serious issue, which is how do you deal with Northern Ireland, the amount of pressure that's being put in that part of the world in relation to the European Union, and how to deal with the internal difficulties of a hard border, where it's going to go, whether it's not going to happen. And, the answer from most politicians has been to flake and to renege and to sacrifice the democracy of what happened in relation to Brexit and the democracy of the Northern Irish people. So, things are fragile, let's put it that way. And it's also, I think, rather depressing that, we have a leadership, and I think it tells you a lot about the current moment. We have a leadership election with all of the candidates trying to put forward their position in this, very exciting way. And actually, most of them are really fussing over tax. And now, don't get me wrong, Colin, you know that I'm not that interested in tax. Tax is a important issue, but it's certainly not tweaking business tax or whatever it is here and there is not going to fix the big questions of the economy. There has been no big vision for the economy set out. And it's in that kind of realm which I think you can expect people to take the easy or the lazy option, which is to look outside of big questions of production, of industry, of doing things and making things in this country, back out into the kind of easy answers of we know the relationships we've had in the past, whether it's the single market or otherwise.
Ella, got to leave it there, but appreciate your time. Ella Whelan. Now, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, denied accusations that he's boring as he laid out his party's priorities for the next election. He also challenged all the Conservative leadership candidates to put their money where their mouth is and call a general election. He added that the Labour Party's next general election campaign will focus on what he described as wealth creation. Let's turn to Alex Norris, who's the Shadow Minister for Levelling Up. Alex Norris, welcome to you. Strategically, or tactically, I should say, it's a difficult moment for opposition politicians, isn't it, when there is this, I'm going to use that word again, I can't help it, psychodrama of a Conservative leadership election. The temptation is just to kick back in the bleachers and watch the bloodshed unfold.
No, I mean, that's not something you'll see from us. You talk about things being difficult. Things are difficult, really, for our constituents, for people dealing with record inflation, for people dealing with long waiting lists. So, no, we won't be taking a back seat. We'll be pushing, as you've seen from Keir, very constructive, very positive ideas, and that's what we'll be spending the summer doing.
Not going to get anywhere with his call for a general election, though, given recent history. Tony Blair giving way to Gordon Brown. David Cameron, the same thing, all the way back to Thatcher and Major. There are enough precedents of it not happening.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure the Blair Brown one's that good of an example for us in the Labour Party, Colin. So, this will be a moment, a significant political moment. You've got all these leaders making all these big promises for which I don't think there's much of a mandate or public support. You look at Nadhim Zahawi promising massive cuts to public services. I don't think that's what people want. I certainly don't think that's what was put to them at the 2019 election. So, of course, we'll call for an election, and that would be the right thing to do if this leader really does think that they're the person to meet the moment. So, what a way to prove it.
It's just on the point about levelling up. I mean, I wouldn't expect for a second you to agree with me, but I observe, as somebody looking at our inbox, and, that's, our inbox, I see quite a few emails saying, and these are from people who are sad to see the back of Boris Johnson, so you wouldn't necessarily agree with them. But quite a few of them make the point that, as far as they're concerned, he's got a legacy that's largely ignored by the media in London on levelling up. Somebody in the northeast talking about infrastructural changes and improvements there. Somebody on Merseyside emailing in last week saying much the same thing. I wouldn't expect you to say, oh, they've got a point. But I observe it's a sentiment that's coming through.
Well, legacies are generally best measured in a longer term rather than in a few days, Colin. But I don't think Boris Johnson will find much salvation in levelling up. Just as your previous interviewee said, the record is, mixed at best. In reality, if new hospitals were built out of press releases or new train lines were built out of strategies, then actually, yes, he'd be the great builder for this country. The reality is that it hasn't matched up with the rhetoric. The press releases haven't led to significant change. So I don't think there'll be a legacy to look at in 10 years' time to say, yes, that was Boris Johnson levelling up the country. In fact, I think it'll be said that there was lots of positive noises, but in the end, not much delivery.
Alex Norris is the Shadow Minister for Levelling Up in a very hot Westminster in every sense. Alex Norris, thanks a lot. Emma Webb is alongside me in our air-conditioned studio, thank goodness. On the levelling up point, I'm seeing emails coming in saying actually Boris doesn't get enough credit for that.
Mm-hmm. I think that there is some truth in what was just said, that there's an awful lot of talk, and that's in all policy areas. And I think one of the reasons for that is that the Conservatives, because of the situation with the pandemic, haven't had the opportunity they otherwise would have had to put a lot of their policies into action, to actually see it bear fruits in time for the next general election. And I think there is a real concern that actually, once the new leader is elected come the autumn, that actually there will be a lot of pressure for them to be tested in a general election, and that wouldn't be good for the Conservative Party, and that not to go lightly on them, but that actually there hasn't been an opportunity for them to sort of prove their mettle in a lot of those key policy areas because of the pandemic.
OK, Emma, for now, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, find out why angry Dutch farmers brought their cows to Parliament and threatened to slaughter them. First, a look at the weather.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather updates. Hot and sunny to start the week. Temperatures won't be as high through the middle of the week. However, there is the potential for temperatures to rise even further come the weekend. High pressure is dominating at the moment. It's bringing plenty of sunshine today, but this weather front is going to bring a change for some of us in the next 24 hours. Certainly the cloud increasing across northwest Scotland, a bit of rain edging in here through the evening and the breeze picking up. For most, it is a very warm summer's evening, and it's going to be a very warm night, a difficult night for sleeping. We will see this rain just spreading more widely across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but temperatures widely holding up in the mid to high teens in parts of eastern England, may not drop below 20 Celsius, so a very warm start to Tuesday. Will be a very different day through western Scotland, through the central belt, thick cloud, a little bit of rain here and there, and some of that rain for Northern Ireland too. For most of England and Wales, well, maybe a bit more cloud than today, thickening up at times, but generally lots of hot, hazy sunshine. Temperatures maybe a degree or so lower, but still into the low 30s across the southeast, widely into the mid-20s. Further north, we will see temperatures a little lower during Tuesday. Through Tuesday evening, again, a bit more cloud, perhaps across parts of the south, maybe the odd spot of rain, a few showers in the far northwest, but for most it stays fine and dry. But this line of cloud across parts of the south early on Wednesday, that is a weather front, and that's introducing slightly cooler air for Wednesday. Again, most places dry with plenty of sunshine, but temperatures won't be as high. We're still looking at very warm conditions, mid to high 20s across the south, low 20s further north. That's more typical for the time of year, but not quite as high, certainly in the south, as these current couple of days. That cold front is the reason why it pushes away the heat, but as high pressure builds back in, we could see the heat building once more during this weekend, particularly so across the south.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Emails are plenty coming in on the Tory leadership contest. Angie says, I would like to know more about Suella Braverman. I don't know too much about her, but do like her no-nonsense approach. I worry the media and left are actively brainwashing to get Rishi Sunak into power. He has so many flaws that would make him unacceptable to the public, so the perfect choice for Labour. Rob says, we need to know of the candidates put forward who supported the no-confidence vote. It was clear for a very long time Johnson has no integrity. Therefore, those who supported him have no integrity. Margaret says Sajid Javid is as dull as ditch water and hasn't got a single memorable thing to say. He's dreadful. Sadly, I am mourning losing Boris and am still angry. David says Penny Mordaunt was a Remainer and wokish. No, she isn't. Trust, therefore, is an issue. Liz Truss was a Remainer, then converted, so again, an issue. Find us some Brexiteers. Well, we're going to talk about farming instead. Angry Dutch farmers recently brought cows to their parliament, threatening to slaughter them in protest at their government's nitrogen reduction targets. The country's goal to halve nitrogen output by 2030 will, it said, force anything up to a third, maybe more, of Dutch farmers out of business, according to a government plan published earlier this month. This has been the source of ongoing protests for over a week now. It's not been much covered here, partly because of all the news we've had, but it's been a big deal in the Netherlands and beyond. Hundreds, for instance, of farmers gathering at The Hague at the seat of government, accompanied by cows, which they threatened to slaughter pretty much on the spot to make their point. Andrew Montford is Deputy Director of Net Zero Watch. Andrew, welcome to you. I want to start actually not with the Netherlands, but Sri Lanka. It's another one of those stories which you won't see necessarily covered on BBC's Country File. But I think it's almost reads like a fable, and it's a fable they'd recognise in the Netherlands, this idea of a government saying, we want to be organic, we want you farmers to stop using nasty chemicals and fertilisers. Suddenly there's no food growing, and they're rioting in the streets, and the government's out of power.
Yeah, it's a very similar story, isn't it? I think it's indicative of the kind of the way that virtue signalling over climate change overrides any sort of rational analysis of what the implications of a policy change might be. I think in the Netherlands, they have simply said, we want to address climate change, and they haven't thought any further than that. And so, there is a real risk that the food supply is damaged. In Sri Lanka, it's a slightly different story in Sri Lanka because the government there had run out of money. So they were perhaps trying to make a virtue out of necessity. They didn't have the money to buy fertilizer, so they said, "Okay, we'll go organic." But they were egged on by Western environmentalists who said, "Yes, this will be marvelous." And of course, it has been a disaster, and the government has fallen. I think this is now going to be a general theme.
Andrew, it already is, isn't it? I mean, lest we think this is just a Dutch issue, it's not. I mean, we have a couple of farmers who've been on this programme recently saying we've got huge incentives to fulfil the environmental lobby's dream of planting more trees, but there's a cost to that, and that is the land that hitherto was used to grow crops is now growing trees, and that's got an impact on food security.
Yeah, that's right. There are hundreds of thousands of acres of land being given over to rewilding, and it's all very pretty. And if Tarquin with his estate in East Anglia wants to have some trees and ponds and things, that's lovely for him. But it does threaten the food supply. It's not just rewilding though. We're giving hundreds of thousands of acres over to solar farms, so we get to pay lots of subsidies to people to take away farming land and further threaten the food supply. But it's wider than that, because it's not the global warming movement now. It's not only threatening food security; it's threatening energy security. So this winter, we look as though there is a real risk of blackouts. Now, the candidates in the Conservative leadership campaign are barely talking about this, but by October, whoever is in power is going to have a major problem to deal with. And I think anyone with any sense, any leadership candidate with any sense, is going to start talking about net zero now.
We'll leave it there. Andrew Motford, appreciate your time. Andrew's the Deputy Director of Net Zero Watch. Emma Webb's alongside me here. On the point about rewilding, planting trees and getting rid of grassland that, before you were feeding your sheep and your cows on, we've got a couple of farmers who come on here and say there's a fundamental misunderstanding. People think if they grow trees, that's it, wonderful. They're going to act as this great carbon sink, sequestrating the carbon from the air. But so does grass.
I think that those who are pushing for this are ideologically blinded, and I think it's absolutely imperative that we get behind the farmers in the Netherlands and support them, because what's going on really is the large-scale equivalent of what we see when we see, Extinction Rebellion protesters blocking ambulances and putting people's lives at risk. This is happening on a large scale, not just
Isn't that what these Dutch farmers are doing, blocking roads with their tractors?
Well, I think the analogy that I'm making is that on a large scale, either with the government or with international organisations, by pushing for net zero at the expense of food security and asking, these Dutch farmers are being asked to slaughter 30% of their livestock and having their farms taken away from them. It's absolutely criminal. And I think it's completely sort of ideological in the way that it's being pursued at the expense of common sense, at recognising what the implications of these policies will be for people. What the Dutch farmers are protesting for is to have a referendum, because it's the same as happened with COVID and public health policy. The emphasis on saying that this is about the science removes it from the political sphere so that people don't get a choice and they don't get to vote on it. And that's what these Dutch farmers want. They want a choice, and I think the people of this country need the same choice.
OK, Emma, for now, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, we'll be debating with Kelvin Mackenzie whether it's ever OK for a politician to stick her middle finger up. Stay with us.
Well, the latest news headlines here on GB News. The former Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has warned the Conservative Party faces electoral division if they don't change. Officially launching his campaign to become the next leader, he called for the Tory party to pull together and avoid poisonous gossip during the contest.
While families are limiting their weekly shop, politicians are getting caught up in arguments over who knew the latest sleaze allegations and when. And this isn't just bad for the country, it's catastrophic for the Conservatives. Because when we lose our integrity, we lose the trust of the British people.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer has accused the Tory leadership candidates of desperately trying to launder their integrity. In a speech delivered in Newcastle, the Labour leader said Britain was dealing with a crumbling economy and deserved better. He also hit out at what he called the hypocrisy of those who served with the Prime Minister, saying they supported tax hikes despite being opposed to them all along.
Well, what we've seen this weekend from all the Tory candidates who want to be leader of their party is £200 billion of unfunded spending commitments. And my challenge to them is say precisely where that money is coming from. Is it going to be cut? If so, what's going to be cut? Because we need to know. Is it going to be borrowing? If so, where are you borrowing from? How much are you borrowing? Or is it just the magic money tree?
And away from politics, a 15-year-old boy has been sentenced to a life sentence for the murder of the schoolgirl Ava White. The teenager must serve a minimum of 13 years for the fatal stabbing of the 12-year-old in Liverpool last November. The defendant, who hasn't been named, claimed he accidentally stabbed Ava in self-defence, but a jury convicted him of murder following a 2-week trial. And the ex-Formula One boss Bernie Ecclestone is to be charged with fraud by false representation. HMRC investigators say they believe they found more than £400 million worth of assets overseas that he failed to declare. The case will have its first hearing on August the 22nd. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
A quick look at today's markets. The pound is 1.190 to the dollar. The pound is 1.180 to the euro. And the price of gold currently standing at £1,459.96 an ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
I don't know whether my monologues hit a nerve, but quite a few of you have been getting in touch with that whole question, as I pose it, of whether the fact that somebody served in the military and maybe risked their lives on behalf of this country makes them more patriotic, than demonstrably patriotic, than someone who hasn't done, particularly in a time when politics and politicians are often quite keen to wrap themselves in the flag and parade their patriotic credentials. Sian says, my father was an officer in North Africa during World War II and a POW until Mussolini capitulated. An honourable, straight-talking, analytical, respectful, brave man. He had no trust in any politicians who had never actively served, calling them lily-livered backstabbers in suits. Bring in 2 years of national military service. That would wake up the wokers. George says many viewers appear to believe that a spell in the military boosts a candidate's CV for the top job. I don't doubt this does help, but it doesn't apply to everyone. After all, Prince Andrew was a serving officer. He's not seeking election. As an ex-officer myself, my experience was that officers issued the orders, but it was the senior non-commissioned officers who actually got things done. And this one, I think, from Dan, the grassroots won't entertain Sunak for his underhand tactics. Sunak is a friend of Cummings, which indicates the betrayal is much deeper than is publicly known. I'm not sure you can necessarily make that connection without knowing for sure it's happened. Liz Truss should walk it, says Dan. John says, Boris Johnson was born in the USA, as you well know. To suggest Rishi is disloyal to GB is a joke. He was born here, at least. Very good point. The appeal hearing to decide whether life support for 12-year-old Archie Battersby should be continued has been taking place at the High Court today. Specialists at the Royal London Hospital think it is, quote, highly likely he is technically dead, while Archie's parents, Holly Dance and Paul Battersby, have disagreed. Archie suffered brain damage after being found with a ligature over his head in April. Let's turn to GB News London reporter Alice Porter, who's been at that hearing of the Family Division of the High Court in London. Alice.
Hi there, good afternoon. Well, for the first time in this legal case, we've heard from the parents of Archie Battersby, who gave evidence today. And it's also the first time that they've accepted that their son may never regain consciousness. So really, the fundamental sort of question and discussion that we were hearing in court today, in the words of the judge who's presiding over this, Mr. Justice Hayden, is the timing and the manner of Archie's death. Now, the hospitals say they're keen to avoid a needlessly chaotic death. And so, for example, they're concerned about whether Archie, if the ventilator is kept, he's kept on it at the moment to breathe, if that is taken away from him, they're concerned about it being needlessly chaotic. So they're concerned that, for example, he could go into cardiac arrest, there would be a crash team, he would need medication to restart his heart, and that could be very stressful for all involved. Or he could end up having an infection as well, and which could be even more difficult to plan. So that's very much the hospital's position, is that by having the ventilator stopped, there could be very much a planned death, that there could be dignity with the family all around and provide that level of support so that it wouldn't be needlessly chaotic. So that's very much the hospital's position. But for the family, Holly Dance said that she would be forever haunted if the ventilator was switched off, and they said that if the judge rules in favour of the family that the ventilator is switched on, is kept on, that they would have a do not resuscitate order in place so that there wouldn't be this chaos that the doctor who was giving evidence described. So those are two of the positions, but we also heard from the hospital appointed guardian, who also said that she did not believe that Archie's dignity is continuing to be maintained. We heard a lot of issues with Archie's digestive problems because of the brain damage that he has suffered, and the hospital appointed guardian also agreed with the hospital that if a decision is made that the ventilator should be switched off, that it should happen sooner rather than later, and that there should not be a delay to this, and that is in Archie's best interest. Now, the parents, of course, completely disagreed with that, and they said that if that decision is made that the ventilator is to be switched off, then they would like time to absorb that information, because, of course, it is important to stress this accident only happened just over 3.5 months ago. So for very much the parents throughout this process, they've simply wanted more time. That's what their sort of argument has been. And then I think finally there's also a discussion just towards the end there about the manner in which this judgment will be made. Previously, when the High Court judge made a decision, it was published online, and that was something that both parents found deeply upsetting. And in fact, Mr. Justice Hayden asked the parents, how would you like this information to be received? They said they would like it to be received orally, and that is currently scheduled for Friday morning on an enormous decision for the judge presiding over this. And of course, there's been a huge amount of legal obstacles to sort of get to this point. But at the heart of it, and I think this was made very, very clear in court today, is the life of a 12-year-old boy who the judge has said that both parents have been at pains to make sure that he is quite rightly at the heart of this story.
Alice Porter, thanks very much indeed. We've been sharing many emails with you today, this afternoon, on the subject of the Conservative leadership election. One of our email correspondents asserting that Penny Mordaunt was a Remainer. Happy to make the correction that she was a Brexiteer. Keep them coming in nonetheless. Our debate this hour, it was the baying mob that made her do it. The new Education Minister, Andrea Jenkyns, said she raised her middle finger to a crowd outside Downing Street as a response to them. Around about the same time, the tennis player Nick Kyrgios could be heard and seen effing and blinding in yesterday's men's single final at Wimbledon. Begs this question: is it acceptable to show obvious anger or annoyance if you're a public figure in public, or should you be able to maintain some self-discipline and control, keep calm and carry on? We're joined by the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and here to consider an alternative position, my studio guest, Emma Webb. Kelvin, we'll start with you. What's your view?
Well, I think anybody who's ever had a baying mob shout at them, which has happened to me, as you might expect, on a number of occasions, is perfectly entitled to respond in kind. Now, her difficulty was, of course, that she was an MP, and therefore her reaction was considered not appropriate for her office. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. Those people shouting at her were all, to a man or to a woman, were all Labour supporters, and they were abusing this woman because of her belief in her politics. So finally, she couldn't take any more, and she gave them the finger. My view about her is, as distinct from an opposing view, my view about her is we should see more of that, and especially we should see more of that from strong women responding to vile socialists, which is what they all are. You know, let's be honest about it. This was totally political, and I quite understand that somebody will be upset, but you can't honestly believe that any of the mob would be upset. They are people who trade constantly in a sense of mental and physical violence. I say good luck to Miss Jenkins in a way that I don't really feel the same quiet way about Kyrgios, and I don't think they should be conflated or confused in any way.
And I think that last point is absolutely fair. They're very different stories, aren't they? Emma Webb's alongside me to ponder on this. Emma, you take a much more critical view of the behaviour of Angela Jenkins. Are we not in danger of being a little bit prissy, though? I mean, you walk out of the studio, you'll hear people effing and blinding, you'll see a gesture that we're taking the time to pixelate, largely on the instructions of Ofcom, the media regulator, but actually you don't have to travel very far to people see it, offering up a middle finger as they lose their rag on the roads, for instance. Are we being a bit prissy?
I think that it's everyone's human. It's understandable that people lose their temper and things like that. But ultimately, you know, describing flipping your finger up at a baying mob.
You were almost going to do it then, weren't you?
I was actually. I had to stop myself. I don't think you should be describing that as being a sign of being a strong woman. I think actually, particularly if you're in public office, the dignified thing to do, and people in that role should firstly show respect to others, but should also have self-respect, that isn't a very self-respecting way to respond. The dignified thing to do would be to ignore the baying mob, and you can criticise them independently, but the dignified and self-respectful thing to do would be to simply walk with your head held high and ignore them. That's the mature thing to do. And I think we need adults in our politics. We need people to behave in a mature way. And I fear that what we're seeing increasingly is this kind of immaturity. The same is true with the Chris Pincher scandal, that actually one aspect that never really got touched on was the fact that he was exceptionally drunk. And people who are in high public office shouldn't be embarrassing themselves like that in public, because that's actually disrespectful also to the public.
That may be true, but try and stop MPs being drunk, and you may have some
Good
trouble.
luck.
And journalists too, for that matter. Kelvin, a final thought. Well, the moment she raised that finger, the mob had won.
No, I don't think so. No, she'd responded to a load of bullying, is the truth about the matter. Is people can only take so much from these vile people, and she did the right thing. After all, it was only probably more your era than mine, but John Prescott responded, didn't he, to an egg being thrown at him, right? And he gave that guy a tremendous whack. And in some ways, I wish that lady had gone out there and had taken on this mob single-handed. We need people like Miss Jenkins. I am so much of a fan of what she's done. I didn't know her history before, and I wish her well for the future.
That's very interesting. It's interesting to remember what Tony Blair said after the John Prescott punch. John is John. And they moved on, didn't they? Kelvin Mackenzie, thanks ever so much, as ever, and to Emma Webb, my guest, who in the studio. We'll be talking to her about another story very soon. Let's try this one. The Church of England has said it doesn't have an official definition of what it is to be a woman. For this, we thank Dr Robert Innes, a senior bishop at the Church of England, who said the meaning of the word woman was previously self-evident, but now additional care was needed. He added there are now, quote, complexities associated with gender identity. Let's ponder on this one with Gavin Ashenden, who's the former chaplain to the Queen. Gavin Ashenden, welcome to you. Is it a complicated area for theologians and others involved with the church?
It's about the least complicated area you could imagine. It's very hard to know what words to use for Dr. Innes and the Church of England, because I want to be compassionate rather than rude, but clearly a bishop who wants to put secular dogma ahead of the authorities that his whole office in the church depends on, the Bible, the teaching of Jesus and tradition, appears to have abandoned Christianity. And it looks like the Church of England has opted to become a socio-religious political club. It's got nothing to do with Christianity. The Bible is very clear that our biology is God-given and our imaginations aren't. So it's hard to know why he would run scared. I think, again, running scared of the mob and preferencing imagination over our God-given biology.
Well, if you can't think of the words, maybe you ought to have taken to heart what Andrea Jenkins did and give us an example. No, only joking. of an example of dissent. Does this come from the top? Does it come down from the Archbishop of Canterbury?
Yes, it does, but it's not just him. It's the whole of the upper hierarchy, and it's not just the church, of course. It's universities, organisations. The NHS has taken mother out of its literature and put in menstruators and breastfeeders. We've got a crisis in our society, and one of the ways in which we can restore a sane pattern of reality, paradoxically, is the church. The church of all people, the church and scientists ought to be hand in hand, saying, we know what reality is, and you can't bend reality with your imagination. And so it's a great shame that the Church of England is abandoning what ought to be its responsibility to try and get society back on track, so that we prefer particularly biological reality, and in the Church of England's case, the Bible and tradition, to secular dogma, which actually is causing an immense amount of distress amongst our teenagers and persecution and difficulties at work. It's not good enough for the Church of England to run scared like this.
Gavin Ashenden, we thank you for your time, as ever. Thanks very much indeed. Now, a very different kind of story. It concerns the growth of the grey squirrel population. It's been absolutely rocketing, and sometimes the effects it's claimed on things like songbirds and the whips that are planted to improve hedges. There's one of the little critters. If you're listening on radio, it's a grey squirrel. You know what they look like because they're absolutely everywhere. Kay Hoare is the director of the UK Squirrel Accord, to reflect, Kay, on a plan that would see hazelnut spread laced with contraceptive such that a grey squirrel who finds him or herself in a trap would lose the ability to procreate. Is that in a nutshell?
That's very well put. Yes. So the grey squirrel is a problem. It was brought into the places in England and Ireland from 1876, and unfortunately causes local extinctions of our red squirrels and also damages our broadleaf trees. And so what we're trying to do is develop an oral contraceptive to reduce the populations of grey squirrels, to protect our red squirrels and our broadleaf trees.
There'll be some people awkward with what feels like a kind of eugenicist programme. I mean, I'm reluctant to use that word. But in a sense, you know, the alternative being to trap and destroy poses fewer moral questions in some respects.
And for what we're trying to find, and as science and technology develops, are alternative methods to the traditional methods that we've used for many, many years, and which are not solving the problem. And so what we're trying to do is develop this fertility control. Fertility control is actually used for wildlife management in various areas of the world. And what we're trying to do is turn something that's an injectable form into an oral format, so that we can put it in a species-specific feeding hopper and feed it to grey squirrels, so that we can effectively remove them with the public support.
And it would be, as you say, species selective, so it wouldn't affect the red squirrels. Kay Hoare, we have to leave it there, we're out of time, but really appreciate yours.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Michelle Dewberry's in the studio to tell us what's coming up on her show. Michelle.
Hello, Colin. Yes, we've seen by now 11 people have got their names into the ring, wanting to be the next Prime Minister. I don't envy any of them, quite frankly, but I'll be looking at that. And also, specifically, tax seems to be the buzzword today. Does the UK need to be a lower tax economy? What does that even look like? And where would we raise money to pay for the things that we so desperately need? Also, Keir Starmer, he's been out today, Colin. He's got a plan. He's going to fix everything. Sounds great. He almost had me signing up for it. But how's it going to work? What is it going to look like? And also crime. When it comes to things like vehicle thefts, thieves nicking stuff as well from your cars, the police, they're barely doing anything about it in this day and age, Colin. So I'm wondering, have we got into a situation now where petty crime basically pays? And stealing from vehicles, it's not actually that petty at all when you think about it. So I'll be looking at all of that and a couple of other bits too.
Yeah, vehicles or your local supermarket. Michelle, looking forward to that. Thanks very much indeed. My thanks to Emma Webb, who's been my studio guest today. Thanks very much indeed, Emma. And also looking forward to that announcement around about 7 o'clock. I suspect it will be leaked before then on what the Backbench 1922 committee has decided to do about the Tory party contest. It will change things. Stay with us.
Alex Deakin here with your latest weather updates. Hot and sunny to start the week. Temperatures won't be as high through the middle of the week. However, there is the potential for temperatures to rise even further come the weekend. High pressure is dominating at the moment. It's bringing plenty of sunshine today, but this weather front is going to bring a change for some of us in the next 24 hours. Certainly the cloud increasing across northwest Scotland, a bit of rain edging in here through the evening and the breeze picking up. For most, it is a very warm summer's evening, and it's going to be a very warm night, a difficult night for sleep.